The silver veil cut through the emptiness like a needle slicing through velvet darkness. Its weathered hull, patched and scarred, caught the faint glow of starlight, casting shimmering ribbons across the void. Captain Adrian Holt leaned back in his chair, boots resting on the console as his ship's AI, Vera, calmly chimed in with updates. "Captain," Vera's mechanical voice filled the cabin. "We're approaching the coordinates. Scans show energy spikes consistent with ascendant technology." Adrian's brow furrowed. "So, we're about to dive headfirst into a place we really shouldn't be?" Vera answered, dry as always. "That's where the best treasures are." Adrian muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the infinite emptiness outside the viewport. For a smuggler like him, forbidden zones weren't just risky, they were lucrative. Alien tech fetched a fortune if you made it out alive, of course. Ahead, the forbidden drift stretched endlessly, an expanse of dead stars and bizarre anomalies that warped space itself. No ship had returned from its depths in centuries, but Adrian wasn't just anyone, and he wasn't about to turn back. "Vera," Adrian asked, leaning forward. "How long till we jump?" 5 minutes, Vera replied. "Enough time for second thoughts." Adrian smirked. "You've been telling me to reconsider from day one, yet here we are." The AI sighed, almost audibly. "I look forward to recording the last words of a very stubborn captain." Adrian opened his mouth to reply, but the ship shuddered violently. The lights flickered, and the hum of the engines faltered. The void outside rippled as if something massive stirred in the unseen depths. "Vera!" Adrian shouted, gripping the console. Unidentified gravitational field. Vera's voice sharpened with alarm. "We're caught in." Before she could finish, the ship lurched, and everything around Adrian fractured. The void outside exploded in blinding light as the silver veil was yanked forward, its hull creaking under immense pressure. Adrian felt weightless for a moment, vision spinning, then everything abruptly went still. Adrian awoke to an unsettling silence. The ship's alarms were muted, and the flickering lights cast eerie shadows across the cockpit. Groaning, he rubbed his temples and glanced at the console. "Vera," he called hoarsely. There was a crackle of static before Vera's voice returned, weaker than usual. "Captain, we've been boarded." Adrian's heart dropped. "What?" "The ship's systems are compromised," Vera said. Someone is on board." Adrian's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. The cold metal of the pistol steadied his nerves as the air in the cockpit felt charged, an unsettling energy prickling his skin. Slowly, he rose, his boots making soft thuds as he moved down the narrow passageway. Shadows seemed to shift and writhe along the walls, adding to the growing tension. He gripped the pistol tighter, his breath steady despite the pounding in his chest. And then, at the end of the corridor, he saw her, a figure cloaked in flowing black, shimmering like liquid starlight. Her skin glowed a pale violet, and her eyes burned with a golden fire. She was impossibly tall, her presence both mesmerizing and menacing. "You trespass," she said, her voice resonating deep in his mind. "And yet, the void has spared you." Curious, Adrian aimed his pistol, his hands shaking, though his gaze never wavered. "Who the hell are you?" Adrian demanded, his pistol still aimed at the woman. She tilted her head, her golden eyes narrowing as she gazed at him. "I am Zyra, and you, human, belong to me now." Before Adrian could react, the world around him twisted. One moment, he was in the narrow corridor of his ship, aiming his gun at the glowing figure. The next, the deck beneath his feet vanished, and he was falling through a kaleidoscope of light and darkness. He landed with a violent jolt on a cold, metallic surface. Groaning, he rolled onto his back and squinted at the scene before him. Above, an infinite void stretched out, rippling with shifting light patterns that pulsed in sync with his heartbeat. The air was thick, buzzing with an electric hum that made his skin crawl. Slowly, he pushed himself to his feet, taking in his surroundings. He stood in a vast chamber, its towering walls adorned with intricate glowing carvings. The floor beneath him was a mosaic of shimmering metal tiles, each one etched with runes that seemed to shift and rewrite themselves before his eyes. At the center of the room stood Zyra, her cloak flowing like liquid starlight as she moved toward him. Her presence was commanding, a blend of grace and power that made Adrian's instincts scream to flee. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice echoing in the vast space. He still held his pistol, but it felt utterly insignificant in the face of what surrounded him. "You are in the Void Citadel," Zyra replied, her voice calm but filled with resonance. "The heart of the Ascendant's domain. A place no mortal has entered in millennia." Adrian's mind raced as he scanned the Citadel. It defied everything he knew, not just alien but impossibly alien, bending the laws of physics, the very fabric of reality itself. himself. The walls curved and stretched in ways that made him dizzy, and the air seemed to hum with an almost palpable power. "Why am I here?" Adrian asked, trying to steady his voice. Zyra stopped a few paces away, locking her golden gaze onto him. "The void chose you. It spared you when it should have consumed you. That makes you significant." "Significant?" Adrian scoffed. "I'm a scavenger, a smuggler. I'm about as insignificant as they come." "Yet," Zyra said, a faint smile curling her lips, "here you stand." With a flick of her hand, the runes on the floor flared to life. Adrian flinched as beams of light shot upward, forming a translucent map of the citadel. The map pulsed with energy, its contours shifting and expanding as though it were alive. "This is the tether," Zyra explained, pointing at the glowing strands of light crisscrossing the map. "It is a network of power binding dimensions together. It is the source of the Ascendant's strength and the reason we rule." Adrian stared at the map, trying to make sense of it all. "And what does this have to do with me?" Zyra's expression darkened. "The tether is fracturing. Something or someone is disturbing its balance. If the tether breaks, the void will collapse, dragging all dimensions with it." Adrian frowned. "And you think I'm involved?" "The void does not spare without reason," she said, her gaze intense. "You are an anomaly, a variable the tether cannot account for. That makes you both dangerous and valuable." "Valuable enough to kidnap me?" Adrian retorted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Zyra stepped forward, her towering presence looming over him. "Valuable enough to be my void consort." Adrian blinked, caught off guard. "You're what?" "You will stand beside me," Zyra replied, her voice calm and commanding. "You will help me uncover why you're immune to the void, and in return, I'll allow you to keep breathing." Adrian couldn't tell if she was joking. Her expression remained unreadable, her golden eyes sharp as ever. "And if I refuse?" Her smile returned, colder than before. "Refusal is not an option." The following days were a blur of surreal experiences. Adrian was given quarters within the citadel, a room that seemed to shift and adapt to his needs. The walls flowed like liquid, effortlessly forming shelves, chairs, and even a bed at his unspoken command. Food appeared at his request, though it tasted strange, unlike anything he had ever encountered. Zyra visited frequently, her presence overwhelming the room like a storm. She bombarded him with questions about humanity, its history, its downfall, its hidden truths. Adrian answered reluctantly, careful to leave out the details that mattered most. Through these conversations, Adrian learned more about the Ascendants. Once mortal beings like him, they had harnessed the power of the void to transcend their limitations. But their immortality came at a steep price. The void had corrupted them, twisting both their minds and bodies over time. Zyra, however, appeared untouched by this corruption, making her both revered and feared among her people. Adrian soon understood that Zyra wasn't just a ruler, she was a prisoner, trapped by the very power she wielded, bound by the responsibilities of her immortality. Despite her cold demeanor, there was a vulnerability to her, a flicker of something human. One night, Adrian stood on the balcony of his quarters, staring into the swirling void. The stars here burned with an intensity he'd never seen, their light pulsing and shifting like living creatures. The sight was both mesmerizing and unnerving. "You're restless," Zyra's voice came from behind him. Adrian turned to see her standing in the doorway, her cloak shimmering softly in the dim light. "It's hard to relax when I'm a prisoner," he said, leaning against the railing. "You are not a prisoner," she replied, stepping out onto the balcony. "You are here because the void chose you." "Funny," Adrian muttered, "that doesn't make me feel any better." Zyra studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "Do you know why humanity fell?" Adrian hesitated. "I've heard the stories. Greed, war, the usual." "Partly," Zyra said, her voice distant. "But the truth is, humanity reached too far, tried to control the void just as we did. But unlike us, humanity refused to accept the price. And now, we are all that remains." Adrian scoffed. "All that remains." Zyra moved closer, her golden eyes never leaving his. "Not gone, forgotten, but the void remembers, Adrian, and so do I." Her words sent an icy shiver down his spine. For the first time, Adrian wondered if Zyra's fascination with him was more than just scientific curiosity. If the void had truly chosen him, what did that mean for the galaxy? As their eyes met, one truth became clear. His life would never be the same again. The void was never silent. It hummed faintly, like a distant vibration that lingered in the back of Adrian's mind. As the days passed, he became attuned to it, feeling how it pulsed in sync with the citadel's shifting walls and glowing glyphs. Despite its beauty, the void was stifling. It pressed against his thoughts, invasive, as if it were a living entity, watching him. Adrian spent his time wandering the labyrinthine corridors of the citadel. The walls, smooth and metallic, pulsed like veins, emitting intricate patterns of light that seemed to shift with his every movement. The citadel's architecture was both awe-inspiring and alien, blending technology with an organic design that felt almost alive. Yet, it wasn't the beauty of the place that unsettled him, it was the whispers. At first, they were barely audible, distant murmurs, like voices on an imaginary breeze. He couldn't decipher the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Questioning, probing, waiting. They followed him, growing louder the deeper he ventured into the citadel. One such exploration led him to an atrium that dwarfed any space he'd seen so far. The ceiling disappeared into shadow, while the floor was covered in glowing glyphs arranged in spiraling patterns. In the center of the atrium stood a towering structure, a pillar of translucent crystals that pulsed with faint blue light. Adrian approached cautiously, his boots echoing softly against the floor. As he neared, the glyphs beneath him brightened, shifting in response to his movement. "What is this?" he muttered to himself. The heart of the citadel, came Zyra's voice from behind him. Adrian jumped, spinning around to see her standing at the edge of the atrium. She moved silently, her cloak trailing behind her like liquid shadow, her golden eyes never leaving his. "You really need to stop sneaking up on me," Adrian said, though his voice lacked its usual bite. Zyra tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You're not the first to be startled by the heart. It has that effect." Adrian turned back to the pillar. "So, what does it do, other than making this place even more unsettling?" "It is the core of the citadel," Zyra explained, moving closer. "A fragment of the void, contained and harnessed. It powers the tether, binding this realm to ours." "And the whispers?" Adrian asked, glancing at her. "Do they come from this thing too?" Zyra's smile faded, her expression growing serious. "The whispers do not come from the void. They are echoes of those who came before you." Adrian frowned. "Before me? You mean other humans? Other mortals?" she corrected softly. "The void chooses sparingly, but when it does, it leaves traces." Adrian turned fully to face her, absorbing the weight of her words. "And what happened to them?" Adrian asked, his voice low. Zyra's golden eyes flickered, and for a moment, a shadow seemed to pass across her face. "They did not survive." Later, alone in his quarters, Adrian couldn't shake Zyra's words. "The void chooses rarely." He had heard her say it before, but she had never given more explanation. Now it lingered in his thoughts, unanswered. Why him? What did it mean to be strong enough? He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the small crystal he still carried. It looked ordinary, yet there was something about it, something alive in the way it warmed his touch. "What are you hiding?" he muttered, turning the crystal over in his hands. Before he could ponder further, a chime rang through the room, and the walls shifted. Zyra stood in the doorway. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Adrian gestured toward the room, his tone dry. "Not like I can say no." She stepped inside, her movements smooth and controlled. For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes focused on the crystal in his hand. "You've bonded with it," she said, her voice steady. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "It's just a rock. How does one bond with a rock?" Zyra's faint smile betrayed a touch of amusement. "It is not a rock. It is a fragment of the tether, and it has chosen you as its keeper." Adrian scoffed. "Great. Another thing that chose me without asking." "You misunderstand," Zyra said, her tone calm. "The crystal does not choose recklessly. It sees something in you that you may not yet understand." Adrian set the crystal down on the table, leaning back. "And what happens if I don't want to be its keeper? Or your void consort?" Zyra's expression hardened slightly. "The void does not take rejection kindly. Nor do I." Adrian smirked, though the tension in the air was palpable. Noted, as the days stretched into weeks, Adrian found himself drawn further into Zyra's world. She began involving him in her studies of the tether, explaining its fragile balance and the role the Ascendants played in preserving it. Despite her cold exterior, Adrian began to notice moments of vulnerability, small cracks in her facade that made him question whether she was as in control as she seemed. One such moment occurred during a council meeting in the Citadel's Grand Chamber. Adrian had been invited, or more accurately ordered, to attend, though he had no idea why. The chamber was an immense amphitheater, filled with Ascendants, each more otherworldly than the last. Their features were sharp, angular, and their movements fluid, unnatural. They spoke in a complex, layered language that vibrated in the air. Zyra stood at the center, her presence undeniable. Yet, as the meeting wore on, Adrian saw her posture stiffen. Her gaze flicked to him repeatedly, as if seeking reassurance. The Ascendants began to argue about him. "He does not belong here," one of them said, their voice resonating like a distant thunderclap. "The void should have consumed him. He is a threat to the balance." Another spoke. spoke, their eyes glowing with an intensity that seemed to pierce through him. "You risk everything by keeping him," one of the ascendants said, their voice thick with disapproval. Zyra raised a hand, silencing the room with a simple gesture. "The void spared him," she said, her tone unwavering. "That alone justifies his place here. And if he proves unworthy," another ascendant challenged. Zyra's gaze turned cold, her golden eyes narrowing. "Then I will handle him myself." Adrian felt an icy chill run down his spine. For the first time, the weight of his position hit him. He wasn't just an anomaly to them. He was a threat. Zyra, despite her composed demeanor, was walking a dangerous line to protect him. As the meeting adjourned and the ascendants began to disperse, Adrian approached her cautiously. "You didn't have to defend me," he said, his voice low. Zyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You misunderstand," she replied calmly. "I do not defend you out of care. I defend you because the void demands it." Adrian smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. How comforting. As she walked away, his mind lingered on her words. Whatever the void required of him, it was clear it came with a cost, one he wasn't sure he was prepared to pay. The void citadel felt more alive than ever. The hum of its walls, the shifting glyphs, had become part of his daily reality, yet now they felt sharper, more insistent. The tension in the air was almost tangible, and Adrian's nerves were on edge. The crystal fragment he'd been carrying pulsed faster each time he touched it, and the same happened whenever he moved closer to the tether's heart. It was as though the fragment and the citadel were communicating, something Adrian wasn't part of. That morning, Zyra summoned him to the heart of the citadel. Her message was brief, cold, and left no room for hesitation. He found her waiting at the base of the towering crystal pillar. Her cloak billowed around her like liquid shadow, and the runes on the floor burned with a fierce intensity, casting intricate patterns of light on her face. She didn't turn as he entered, but he could tell she was fully aware of his presence. "Adrian," Zyra said, her voice softer than usual. "The void is stirring." "I noticed," Adrian replied, stopping a few steps behind her. His gaze drifted to the heart of the citadel, where the swirling energy had grown more erratic. "What's happening?" Zyra finally turned to face him, her golden eyes brighter than ever. A faint but noticeable tension tightened her features, making her seem almost human. "The tether is waking," she said, her voice serious. Adrian frowned. "Waking? You make it sound alive." "It is," Zyra answered simply. "The tether is neither machine nor pure energy. It is a living force, a bridge between dimensions, and something is disrupting it." Adrian crossed his arms, skeptical. "Let me guess, you think it's me?" "You misunderstand," Zyra said, stepping closer to him. "You're not disrupting the tether. You're amplifying it." Adrian blinked, confusion clouding his thoughts. "Amplifying? How is that even possible?" Zyra gestured to the crystal fragment in his hand. "The fragment you carry is not inert. It's connected to the tether, and you are awakening its power. It's a piece of the tether itself, and it has bonded with you. Your presence amplifies its power." Adrian stared at the glowing fragment in his hand, its light casting faint shadows across his palm. "So, I'm just a battery?" "Not just a battery," Zyra said, her tone neutral. "A catalyst." Before Adrian could respond, the room shook violently. The glyphs on the walls blazed to life, their light growing brighter. A deep, vibrating hum filled the air, growing louder and more intense by the second. Adrian staggered back, gripping the fragment tightly. "What's going on?" he yelled. Zyra's gaze snapped to the heart of the citadel. "The tether is reacting. Something is forcing it to awaken." Adrian followed her gaze, his gut churning as the swirling energy inside the pillar began to spiral uncontrollably. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that prickled his skin. "We need to stabilize it," Zyra said, striding toward the heart. "The tether cannot awaken prematurely." "Prematurely?" Adrian asked, rushing after her. "What happens if it does?" Zyra didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hands, and the glyphs beneath them burst to life with radiant light. The chamber vibrated as she began chanting in a language Adrian couldn't understand, yet it resonated in his chest. The fragment in his hand grew warmer, its glow intensifying. He felt an undeniable pull toward the heart, an irresistible connection. "Adrian, stop!" Zyra's voice pierced through the rising hum. "The tether's energy is too volatile. If you get any closer," but her warning came too late. The fragment flared brightly, and a surge of energy shot from the heart, enveloping Adrian in a blinding light. For a moment, he felt weightless, his mind overwhelmed by visions, worlds collapsing, stars being born, and cosmic threads weaving through the universe. Then the light faded. He found himself on his knees, gasping for air. The chamber was silent now, the heart's energy subdued. Zyra stood over him, her expression unreadable. "You survived," she said said softly. I wasn't sure you would. Adrian looked up at her, his mind reeling. What was that? The tether showed you its memory, Zyra replied. Fragments of its past, its creation, its purpose, and its eventual destruction. Adrian shook his head, struggling to make sense of the flood of images. It was too much. I couldn't. You weren't meant to understand it all at once, Zyra interrupted. Even the Ascendants cannot fully grasp the tether's nature. But now you know the truth. Adrian forced himself to his feet, the fragment still glowing faintly in his hand. And what truth is that? Zyra stepped closer, her golden eyes fixed on his. That the tether is breaking, and only you can fix it. Later, as Adrian sat in his quarters, the images from the tether's memory replayed in his mind. The vision of its collapse burned in his mind like a constant reminder of the stakes ahead. He didn't trust Zyra, and he wasn't sure he could trust himself. But the truth was undeniable. Something immense was coming. Bigger than the Ascendants, bigger than the void itself. And whether he liked it or not, he was at the center of it. Staring at the fragment, its soft glow pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat, Adrian made an unspoken promise. Whatever the void required, no matter the price, he would endure. Because that's what humans do, survive. The tether haunted Adrian's dreams, pulling him into vast realms of shifting light and shadow. Threads of energy intertwined, forming intricate patterns beyond comprehension. Voices whispered through the void, some gentle, others harsh, their words impossible to make sense of. Adrian couldn't tell if they were echoes of the tether or remnants of the countless lives it had affected. Each time he awoke, the fragment was still in his hand, glowing faintly in sync with his own pulse. During the day, the citadel buzzed with mounting anxiety. Zyra's warnings about the tether's instability had spread throughout the Ascendant ranks, turning whispers of Adrian's presence into open hostility. Many saw him as a dangerous anomaly, one that needed to be removed. He wasn't blind to their disdain. He could feel the weight of their glares as he walked the halls, but it was Zyra who truly concerned him. The mask of calm she wore was cracking, revealing the strain of her responsibilities. We don't have much time, she told him one evening as they stood on the citadel's balcony, gazing into the darkened void. The stars, usually brilliant, seemed to be fading, swallowed by the tether's increasing instability. What happens if the tether collapses? Adrian asked, his voice barely a whisper. Zyra's eyes never left the distant horizon. The tether connects all dimensions. If it fails, the void will consume everything, your world, mine, everything. It will all unravel. Frustration surged in Adrian. And I'm just supposed to fix it? With no idea what I'm doing, or why I'm even involved. Zyra turned to him, her golden eyes intense. You are more powerful than you think. The tether didn't choose randomly. It saw something in you, strength you don't even recognize in yourself. Adrian met her gaze, his jaw set. What if it's wrong? For a brief moment, her hard exterior softened. It isn't. 3 days later, the citadel trembled as the tether's energy spiraled out of control. Alarms screamed, and the glyphs on the walls flickered wildly. Adrian raced to the heart of the citadel, clutching the fragment, its heat now searing his palm. When he arrived, Zyra was already there, her cloak billowing as she gave orders to Ascendant technicians. It's not enough, one shouted. The energy's out of control. We need more time. We don't have more time, Zyra snapped, her usual composure slipping. Adrian stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. What do you need me to do? Zyra turned to him, her face a blend of relief and desperation. The fragment, it's the key to stabilizing the tether. But you'll need to enter the core to use it. Adrian's stomach twisted. Enter the core? Are you serious? The tether's energy will consume anyone who isn't bonded to it, she explained. But you're different. The fragment makes you immune. Adrian hesitated, his pulse quickening. And if I refuse? Her golden eyes flashed with intensity. Then the tether will collapse, and everything will be lost. Then everything ends. The journey to the core was unlike anything Adrian had ever known. As he approached, the chamber's walls seemed to bend and stretch, pulling him toward the swirling vortex at the center. The fragment in his palm pulsed, its heat radiating through his skin without causing harm. Despite the strange sensation, he felt a growing sense of urgency. Zyra stood nearby, her face unreadable. Once you enter, focus, she instructed, her voice steady. The fragment will guide you, but it will test you. Do not waver. Adrian cracked a smile, masking his anxiety. No pressure, right? Zyra's lips twitched slightly. Humanity thrives under pressure. Before he could reply, the vortex surged, and the fragment yanked him forward. He stumbled into the swirling chaos, the world around him dissolving into a blinding light. Inside the tether, time and space ceased to make sense. Adrian floated through an endless sea of light and shadow, echo, the voices of the void swelling into a chorus. "Why do you resist?" boomed the voice, its resonance shaking him. Adrian spun around, searching for its source. "Resist? I'm trying to help. You are unworthy," the voice replied coldly. "Your kind has always been unworthy." Frustration bubbled up inside him. "You think I wanted this? You think I asked to be dragged into your mess? I'm just trying to survive. And yet you are here." The voice softened. "You carry the strength of a forgotten people. Prove it." The light shifted, forming into images, visions of humanity's past. Its rise, its fall, and all the mistakes in between. But beneath it all, Adrian saw the core of what humanity truly was. The relentless drive to endure against all odds. Adrian clenched his fists. "We're not perfect, but we never quit. And if that's what you want, then I'm your man." The light surged in response, and the fragment blazed to life. The voices fell silent as the chaotic energy around him steadied. Slowly, the vortex calmed, its tumultuous movements smoothing into a rhythmic flow. When the light dimmed, Adrian found himself back in the chamber. Zyra stood at the edge, her golden eyes wide with disbelief. "You did it," she whispered. Adrian collapsed to his knees, the fragment still glowing faintly in his hand. "Yeah," he breathed, exhausted. "I did." In the following days, the citadel settled into a fragile peace. The tether remained stable, but Adrian knew the danger was far from gone. The void had shown him something vast, something still lingering in the dark. As he stood on his quarters balcony, gazing at the stars, Zyra joined him. For once, her expression was unguarded, almost human. "The void isn't finished with you," she said quietly. Adrian smirked. "I figured as much." She turned to him, her golden eyes searching his face. "You've changed everything, Adrian. For the Ascendants, for the galaxy, and for me." He met her gaze, his smirk softening into something more sincere. "Guess we'll see if that's a good thing." They stood in silence, the weight of their shared future between them. The void hummed softly in the distance, a reminder that their journey had only just begun. But for the first time, Adrian felt ready, because that's what humans do.